So with the release of Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, there is one question that is very clear. How well does it run and look on the original Switch 1? This console is 8 years old, and kind of a far stretch to run a modern AAA game from 2025 on it. And even Nintendo knows that, as they only showed Switch 2 gameplay for almost all of the trailers. So in today's video, I've done an extensive graphics comparison, and we're going to take a look at what the difference is. And let's just say it's quite impressive what they've done, but it's pretty bad graphics considering how good the Switch 2 is, but it's amazing graphics considering the console it's running on. So let's get into it. Before Metroid Prime 4 came out, there were rumors about what resolution the Switch 1 would run at. We knew that the Switch 2 would run at 4K 60 in docked mode with the option of 1080p 120, and we knew that it would run at 1080p 60 in handheld mode with an option of 720p 60 if you got the Switch 2 edition. But as Nintendo rarely showed Switch 1 gameplay, they never officially stated what it ran at. So after doing some digging, I found that it's most likely to run at about 900p, which is kind of short of 1080p in docked mode while on Samus's visor, yet it seems that it could possibly drop down to 520p when not on Samus's visor and in portable mode on the Switch 1, which kind of does line up from what I've seen from all the testing I've done and just with my eyes of what it looks like. Now, in 2025, those numbers are honestly abysmal, but let's take a look at the actual gameplay between the two. So I recorded a few areas with my Elgato capture card, both in dock mode running at their max resolution, so 4K and 900p respectively, and honestly, to the naked eye, there's not much of a difference to be shot. It honestly just kind of looks like the poly count was slightly lower on the Switch 1 edition, but I mean, you can tell like on her gun, there's more fragmenting and more of those little like lines from the not putting out as much pixels as needed, which honestly the Switch 2 has a little bit of that, but you can see a pretty big difference. But where I noticed the dip was in the non-pre-rendered cutscenes, so the cutscenes that were being rendered as it plays out, and you can see a substantial difference. But when you zoom in, you can see a huge difference. Overall, like right here with this cutscene, you can see that the Switch 2 is dramatically better at its 4K, which it should be because it's supposed to be a jump from 900p to 4K. But overall gameplay, it never dropped any frames, staying at a lock 60. And honestly, if you're sitting a good amount of feet away, you're not gonna really notice it unless you're sitting up close and in those cutscenes. You still will notice it, but I don't think it's going to be that big of a problem. Which also just goes to show how amazing the developers took advantage of the Switch 1, a console with tech from 2015, 2016, running a modern AAA game in 2025. And Metroid Prime 4 isn't the most graphical game, out there because it's running on handhelds, but genuinely amazing. And touching on the Switch 2 edition, even more amazing. And no really frame dips in the Switch 2 edition either, but it just looks so much better. I remember playing Metroid Prime 1, and if I got up and just looked at the TV, you could see those little fragmenting, and it just didn't look that well. And that had kind of come an equivalent for me whenever I was expecting a new Nintendo game, and I genuinely was shocked that when I did that with the Switch 2 edition, I barely to basically didn't see any of those. So this is also a really good showcase of the Switch 2's hardware, as I think it shows off really what we've been waiting for. But let's talk about frame rate. So in their highest resolutions, they both run at a lock 60. Now I've beat the whole entire game on the Switch 2, and I can say that about 99% of the time it will stay at 60 FPS. In fact, I only noticed a singular frame drop in my over 40 hours of playing this game, which was oddly enough at the end game cutscene, but it only lasted for about 2 seconds, and that was the only problem in there, and I was playing it at 4K 60 the whole time, by the way. Now, of course, I haven't had as much experience with the Switch 1 edition as I've only played the Switch 1 edition for my testing. But in my testing, I did not notice any frame drops, which I really think is amazing. But something else that's new with the Switch 2 edition is 120 FPS mode. Now, if you do play in this in docked mode, it will be at 1080p, which actually still is higher resolution than the Switch 1, and in handheld mode, 720p, which again is still higher resolution. And looking here, you can tell, even in handheld mode, running at 720p 120 FPS, that the Switch 2 still looks a good bit better, not as much as before because it's running at a significantly lower resolution. Now, I didn't get to test 120 1080p because my capture card doesn't support 120 FPS, nor does any of my TVs or monitors. So the only way I could test this was in handheld mode. And as you can see, it appears to be running at a locked 120, which I think is really good. Now, as you can see in the footage of this 120 FPS gameplay, I did shoot this video in 120 FPS exactly, and you can kind of see ghosting, but for the most part, it looks perfectly smooth. Now, let's transition over to the Switch 1. This video was again shot in 120 FPS, but of course the Switch 1 is only outputting at 60, and you can see a pretty big difference, although honestly the difference isn't as much. But when you're not viewing it in slow motion and just viewing it regularly, the Switch 2 120 FPS is really amazing. And I rarely played it in handheld mode because I didn't go out much that week I played it. But when I did play it in handheld mode, I usually always switched it to 120 FPS just because I thought it was so cool. And it's genuinely surprising to me that this is the first 120 FPS game, as I think it is probably the most graphically intensive game Nintendo's ever made. And I do really think this is a showcase of the Switch 2's power. So overall, comparing both the graphics, the Switch 1 is quite a downgrade as expected. I mean, you're paying for this new console, you would expect it to look somewhat better. It does look a lot better, but for those Switch 1 users that have yet to get a Switch 2, you'll still enjoy your experience. And unless you're a real nitpick, it's not going to be too bothering. If I were playing it, it's not going to be too bothering. It actually runs at a similar resolution to Metroid Prime Remastered, which I have beat that game like 2 times on the original Switch, and it never bugged me. It looked really good. It was one of the best looking Switch games, and I kind of think Prime 4 looks better than Prime 1 Remastered on Switch 1. So overall, great job Nintendo for making it run good, because I was kind of afraid that Nintendo would kind of forget about the Switch 1, but it is really a true cross-gen game, and a good one at that. Anyways guys, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you're looking forward to my Metroid Prime 4 review and the Nintendo Game Awards. Not exactly sure of those schedules yet because December is going to be very busy, even though it's December and I'm not putting out as much videos, but technically I am. So yeah, anyways y'all, thanks for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe, and I will see y'all in the next one.